Hi, everybody. Welcome back to my channel. Today, we have a really special guest, Kay Toma, who was a former software engineer that transitioned into product management at Microsoft and then went on to work on product at Snapchat. We'll be talking about her journey, her transition from software engineering into product management, as well as any advice she has for aspiring product managers. Welcome, Kay. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you, Helinda. I'm super excited. I'm super excited to chat.
Awesome. So I wanted to start off by giving the audience here a little bit of an overview of your background. Can you tell us how you started your career?
Yeah, so I started off, so I have really entrepreneurial parents. I grew up watching my parents build and start their own business from scratch. And so I've always known that I wanted to do something similar, like build my own business in some way. But I don't know, like how do you major in that for college, right? Like how does that translate into a college major? And so I actually ended up studying computer science, which like was purely because that's what all of my girlfriends were doing at the time. And I still didn't really have a clear idea of like what exactly I wanted to do, what I wanted to do once I graduated. But having studied CS, I figured, I would first start off with software engineering. I wanted to really hone the technical skills that I had built through college, and I really wanted to establish myself as a builder. And it was actually while I was a software engineer at Microsoft that I even discovered like what the role of a PM is or a product manager is. And I really felt like the PM role has a lot of aspects that are really similar to sort of that entrepreneurial dream that I have always had. And so that's really what led me to make the transition from software engineer to product manager. And it's also the reason why I ended up going to companies like Snapchat and Clubhouse to specifically work with creators. Because to me, creator is just another brand, it's just like another name of how you call someone who's a solopreneur or someone who's an entrepreneur in some way. And so I wanted to work even more closely with these types of people.
That's awesome. And it's awesome that kind of your childhood dream about being an entrepreneur kind of helped fuel your passion for product and product management. And it's also awesome that you study computer science because your friends were studying it as well. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
I think it's so important just the people you surround yourself with. And I feel really, really lucky and really, really grateful for the friends that I made in college. And I think like just the career path that I've been able to have is really thanks to the friends that I made.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So product management is typically not something that one majors in, as kind of we talked about earlier. There's like no specific major that you go to school for. So how did you discover the discipline of product management and what initially piqued your interest?
Yeah, I honestly, I feel like I'm really going to date myself by saying this, but when I was in college, PM was not as well known. It was definitely absolutely not as mainstream. There were way fewer PM internships, and the only APM programs, really, there was like only a handful, and they were like the top OG APM programs like Google, I think Uber. Anyway, I only discovered PM was even a thing actually because one of my friends was doing it. And I felt like a lot of the skills that she was able to build and exercise really resonated with the idea and the goals that I had of like, oh, what must it be like to build your own business?
Got it. And I guess like to kind of go into that, double click that into a little bit deeper. What specifically about entrepreneurship appeals to you?
I think a lot of people are in tech or work in tech because of a love of building. And I think this love of building, this can take form in many different ways. So I think like maybe the most traditional or easiest example is a software engineer. I think I was a software engineer for a good portion of time because I felt so much pride and so much satisfaction to see code that I wrote, something that I built being used by other people, being helpful to other people. And I think entrepreneurship is a creative expression in of itself because you're basically going from like literally nothing. You're taking like nothing and then you're building it into something that like creates value for other people, something that hopefully gives other people joy or makes their lives easier or gives them some sort of positive experience.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's like making an impact on the world and knowing that you sort of had a large hand in it and seeing the reactions on people's faces because of the work that you created, right? So, yeah, that's
Yeah.
awesome. So, once you made the decision to go into product management, how did you navigate the transition? Did you shadow anyone? Did you have to do a bunch of prep interviews? Were there resources that you read up on? What was that process like for you?
Yeah, my process, I would say the beginning was so in the beginning, I studied basically like all of what were like the classic like PM prep books at the time. So Cracking the PM Interview. I think Lewis Lynn has a PM interview book. I think honestly what was the most helpful and the most eye-opening was just the fact that I had one of my closest friends uh, is and was a product manager. And so just getting to learn so much from her own experience and just having that transparency of seeing what her day-to-day was like, what her responsibilities and expectations were, gave me a really clear view of what PM was, as well as branching off and just doing coffee chats with a lot of other product managers to get an idea of what the job was and what responsibilities there were.
Got it. Were you focusing mainly on people that you were working with, or was this sort of outside the like when you were at Microsoft?
Yeah, this was at Microsoft. I think at the time I was doing primarily coffee chats with PMs within Microsoft. But I think if I could go back, or basically what I would recommend to other people is just get a really diverse set of when you do coffee chats, just because PM is there's like so many different types of PM. There's so many different ways you can specialize as a PM, and there's so many, the job just takes so many different forms, I think, based on like the company and the culture.
Got it, got it. And did you transition within Microsoft, or did you transition, like, were you looking for opportunities outside of Microsoft?
I did. I transitioned within Microsoft.
I see. What was the process like? Did you have to go through interviews? Was it more of, hey, like you found a hiring manager and then you were able to transition? What was that like internally?
Yeah, so basically how to make the switch internal in Microsoft.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I made the switch actually directly on my own team. I think I have found that that's the most straightforward approach, because generally what I see as the biggest challenge for folks who are trying to get their foot in the door with product management, especially when you don't already just have the label of product manager on your resume previously, the hardest thing is to get your foot in the door.
Mhm.
And when you're, for example, applying to other companies, it's really hard to have someone who's going to vouch for you when you don't have that experience. So when it's on your own team, especially, a team that you've built trust in, a team where people know that you're a team player, that you're a reliable teammate, they're going to want to keep you and they're going to be able to vouch for you. And so I've found that not just for myself, but for others who have switched into product management, that's one of the most straightforward ways. So for me, it was really just like working through my own team to make that switch. But for other people that I've also seen who transitioned internally, for example, at Microsoft, it's getting to know the hiring manager and then doing a transfer internally. It's still, even if you don't transfer within your own team, I would say it's still relatively easier to do it within your own company, because it's usually easier to build a network, build connections, like for example, on your target team with the target hiring manager. And you also have sort of all of your history at that company, your performance history. And so there's basically less risk, I would say, for the hiring team.
Yep, that makes sense. So I actually also transferred internally within my own team as well. Did you have the same challenges as I had around people kind of still assuming your previous role, or was there a pretty even, like a clean split for you?
Oh, yeah. Could you tell me more what your experience was?
Yeah, so I was actually a program manager, design program manager, and when I actually did my transition, I think it felt like people still saw me as a DPM before I transitioned to a product management role. I was talking to my mentor about this, and I think he had actually advocated for me to go and like go and do it cleanly and like go a brand new team and start fresh as a product manager. But I kind of had the same, like it was probably easier. I already built a reputation, people already know me. And Yeah, I think it took maybe like a good 6 months, a years, for me to really feel like I was a PM on that team. I was curious if you had the similar experience, or maybe with software engineering it's a little bit different.
That's super, super interesting to hear. And I can definitely see that happening, just going from the transition of a program manager role or a TPM role to product manager. I think a lot of folks, even people who work within tech, don't fully understand the difference. And so I just, yeah, I feel like I can really understand what you went through. In terms of my own transition, I think because software engineering and PM is just so starkly different, I did not have that sort of similar experience. Actually, wait, now that I think about it, when I did first transition into PM, they did actually still ask me to code basically. Basically, because it was on my old team, they needed me to pitch in basically for something that was super high urgency that I had experience in. But that was the last of it.
Awesome, awesome. So once you kind of made the transition, was there anything that surprised you about product management?
Mm, I I think one of the biggest surprises that I had, and something that I would recommend to folks who are trying to switch into product management, is just realizing that there are so many different types of PM. And because of that, your expectations for your role are very different on that type. So I think as a baby PM, and I think a lot of people who like get their first exposure into product management, typically you think of like a traditional consumer product manager. And I think a lot of modern interviews are designed around consumer product managers. So for example, like consumer product management thinking is something like the product sense interview or like the product design interview. But for example, if you're a B2B PM or if you're a platform PM, your design process is highly different than a consumer PM.
That's awesome. So when you made this transition to Microsoft, were you a B2B PM? And then did you go on to do more B2C, or like what was your background in the different PM disciplines like for you?
Yeah, at Microsoft, I was primarily a B2B platform product manager. And then when I transitioned to Snapchat and both Clubhouse, those are very like highly purely consumer roles.
Got it, got it. Which one did you enjoy better?
In terms of like the PM type,
Yeah, the PM type.
I think I think for me it was less necessarily about like the process of each type. So for example, like being a B2B PM is a lot more like your recs are a lot more driven directly from your customers. It can be a lot more tops down at times because you have such like high paying clients. Whereas consumer is a lot more experimental. It's a lot more bottoms up. So for me, it's actually like less about that. I think it was more about the product space, the product space that I was working on. So I really love like the consumer, getting to work with creators, getting to work in the social media space. I think I really miss though, like working on deeply technical challenges of being a platform product manager. And I also miss, I think, like the relationship building of being a B2B PM, because I would say as a B2B PM, you have more like direct relationships with your customers, whereas consumer is just like you have like easily millions, if not hundreds of millions of users. You don't really build as much of like a one-to-one relationship.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think with B2C, you're also looking a lot on data because you have a large number of users, right? Versus like for B2B, you have really close, more like one-on-one relationships with your customers, so you kind of develop sort of that deep empathy and understanding. So that's awesome. Makes a lot of sense. So for people that are considering transitioning from perhaps software engineering to product management, what do you think some of the most important factors they should be considering when making this decision?
For moving into software engineering into product management, I think at the end of the day, at the end of the day, I really hope for and I really want people to pursue the career that speaks the most to their dreams and aspirations. I think it's also really important to take into consideration that the days are long, but the years are short. So what I mean by that is, make sure that you pick the career where you're happy and thriving in your day to day. I think that was really important and really impactful for me when I made the switch from SWE to PM. But I also do want to call out, and I actually remember very clearly my software engineering, my dev mentor when I was an intern actually gave me this exact advice at the time. And I think it's very, very relevant to today's markets and what we're going through. But software engineers will have a lot more job security than product managers in job downturns. And so I think that's something to take into consideration depending on just considering whatever your risk tolerance is.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, there's a lot more software engineers than there are product managers. Just given the sheer numbers, right? So in terms of advice, what other advice do you have for aspiring product managers, whether it's like interview prep or thinking about transitioning? Any other insights or guidance that you can give to people?
Yeah, I think for a lot of folks who are trying to switch into PM, and I really, really relate to this as someone who really struggled to switch into PM. I think, we want it to happen right away. And I work with a lot of folks. I coach a lot of clients to help them switch into PM. And I know obviously all of us, we want it to happen as soon as possible. And I think we have to be more realistic with the timeline, just depending on where you are at in your career, what company you might be working at, that whether or not they would support that kind of job transition, and honestly the kind of network that you necessarily have. So I think looking at my own transition, one of the mistakes that I made early on was that I did not have a clear plan of how I was going to switch into PM. I really treated it kind of like when you're in college in your new grad and you can just apply anywhere into any job. And I think it was a very difficult realization. And I hear this too from other folks who have done job discipline switches, but I think something that we are not totally aware or prepared for going from university into corporate is that discipline switches are not easy. It's not like you just apply and then you can get an interview. So I think it's very, very important for people to define their plan when they start of how they're going to switch. So I would say my top recommendations of how to make the switch is, one, do it within your team or company if possible. Or two, if you are within the number of years, do an APM program. And even if you've been graduated for a couple of years, double check, because a lot of them, you can still apply. You can still apply even after you've graduated. Many APM programs I see now even take mid-career folks. I have some, I recently coached someone who's mid-career into switching into an APM program. And then lastly, one other option is if your company doesn't support a discipline switch, then you might actually need to be planning for, okay, how do I switch into a different company in my current role, but to specifically targeting a company that would support this switch. So you can see just depending on the plan that you define for yourself, you're going to have to do a different set of actions that will get you closer to each of these goals, whether it's, for example, networking to get the right job at the right company, or how you apply or how you prepare for an APM program per se.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and I agree with you. I think transferring internally is probably the easiest, just because when I think about the factors of change, right? One is a new discipline, second is a new team, third is a new company, right? So if you try to kind of keep other variables consistent, and the only thing that you have to worry about is to kind of transition into a new role, it I think makes the process a lot easier. Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on. A plug to Kay's YouTube channel. It's at youtube.com by Kay Toma, and your LinkedIn, which is Kay Toma. So thank you so much. Really great chatting with you, and yeah, we'll love to kind of see how your entrepreneurship grows.
Thank you so much, Helinda, and best of luck to everyone who's working to make the transfer into PM.
Awesome.